and then I would leave. I started nodding out at the office. I actually did a job interview with someone. I was interviewing them for a job at the magazine, and I nodded out in the resume in hand in the middle of that interview. We offered the guy the job, and he declined. So, listen, it was brutal. I would go to emergency rooms in the middle of the night because I was out. And I thought, okay, I can con some exhausted young doctor in an emergency room. I went to St. Vincent's Hospital in Greenwich Village, which is no longer there. It's now 8-figure condos. But I went once in a tuxedo, thinking that would convince them that I wasn't just your average junkie looking for pills. While I was in the sort of triage area, I had just changed into a blue paper gown that they'd given me. I was seated across from a woman in a pink paper gown who was repeatedly flashing herself to me and taking those single alcohol wipes and opening the package, rubbing them all over her face, dropping them on the floor, and then she would take another one and flashing me all of this. So when I finally sit down with the doctor, I say to him, wow, you won't believe, because I would always try to be as normal and conversational as possible, no matter how shitty I was feeling.
Yeah.
And I explained to the doctor, wow, there's this woman was just doing all this sort of weird stuff. And he said, what color gown was she wearing? Was it pink? And I said, how would you know that? And he said, well, we give pink gowns to the people that we think are potentially psychiatric concerns.
Right.
3 months later, I go back in the middle of the night to St. Vincent's Hospital. I'm not wearing a tuxedo this time, and I was going through a particularly awful case of withdrawal.
They put you in pink.
The triage nurse looked at me. She said, it's going to be a few minutes, but why don't you go ahead and put this gown on, and handed me a pink paper gown.
You knew right then.
And I left immediately.
Oh.
So it was obviously very clear to some people that were paying attention, or that were that I had a problem.
Yeah.
You could lie. Addicts will do anything to protect the addiction.
Yep.
And I did anything to protect the addiction. It was my number one, and in many cases, only priority.
Well, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 priorities.
Easily.
That's it.
And so
work, children, and nutrition, all that stuff.
None of that, right? And thankfully, I wasn't a father yet at that point. But it was all I cared about, right? Mm-hmm. Getting more, taking them.
I've had people say they can't kill themselves because they couldn't do that to their drugs. They love them so much.
Absolutely.
You understand that?
Yes. I got to the point where I could look at one of those orange opaque prescription bottles and tell you how many pills were in it at a glance.
Yeah.
The way, on Halloween you have to guess how much candy corn is in the jar.
Yeah. I
could look at it and say, all right, I have about 35 pills in there. That's going to get me through to tomorrow morning. Mm. And it was awful. Just absolutely awful.
I want to introduce you to Health IQ. They use science and data to secure lower rates for people like you for their life insurance. Like you're a runner, a cyclist, a vegetarian, vegan, you need to be rewarded for your hard work with more affordable life insurance rates. Health IQ can save you up to 41% because physically active people have significantly lower risk, I think you know this, for heart disease, cancer, and diabetes. But Health IQ is not just a lead generator. They take the customer through the entire process of applying, and the policy is underwritten by one of our top insurance partners. But the savings are exclusive to Health IQ. You won't find them anywhere else, and you must qualify to get that special rate. To see if you qualify, go to healthiq.com/Drew, not Dr. Drew, just Drew, and take their proprietary Health IQ quiz. Depending on your score, as well as other related qualifying factors, you can save up to 41% on your life insurance premiums compared to other providers. Again, that is healthiq.com/Drew to let them know we sent you and start the process with the Health IQ quiz. There's no commitment, and you'll learn even more about potential opportunities to be rewarded for your commitment to living healthy. One more time, that is healthiq.com/Drew. If you like my show, you're going to love Showmance with Kevin McHale and Jenna Ushkowitz on Podcast One. Join the former Glee stars as the best and Join the former Glee stars and best friends as they interview other dynamic duos about the wild ups and downs of balancing a relationship on set. Download new episodes of Showmance with Kevin McHale and Jenna Ushkowitz every week on Podcast One.
And so you started wanting to stop. Why?
I eventually, that's a good question. I started wanting to stop because I was scared I was going to die.
Did you have any overdoses or anything?
Yes, I overdosed fairly regularly.
Okay.
I was not breathing. I was sleeping one night with a girlfriend who I woke up with her literally like on top of me, shaking me aggressively, saying like, "You're holding your breath and gasping for air." Moments like that, I would come away and say, "Wow, this is bad." Or vomiting in random places, like unexpectedly. Like, okay, this is really bad. So I said to myself, okay, look, I need to wind this down. But typical sort of addict reasoning, I'll just do it on weekends, or I'll just do it after work. No, listen, that's obviously, we both know that's a joke.
Yeah.
So I eventually needed to stop. I had, in this time, met and married my wife. And toward the very end of this, horrible, addiction, she got pregnant. And I was going to become a father. And that was it for me. I was like, all right, I really, really, really need to stop. In many ways, she saved my life because she discovered that I was taking the pills and basically threw me out. So I did what, any sort of self-respecting, Jewish man would do. I went to my mom and literally went to my mother's house in Baltimore. And I, for 2 weeks, went through a detox and went through withdrawal. I went to my first AA meeting down in Baltimore. I remember that meeting so clearly. I walked in and was terrified and wasn't sure what to expect and wasn't sure I was even in the right place because it was an AA meeting, and it turned out to be the right place for me. But I remember in that meeting, a young guy stood up and said, "I have 6 months today." And I thought, holy shit, I cannot believe, how did this guy go 6 months?
Right.
In the very same meeting, a guy stood up and said, "I had 27 years and I was on a flight and the flight attendant asked me if I wanted a drink and I said yes." So I was shit scared, but I detoxed in Baltimore, took a train back to New York. On that train, called a doctor to get a prescription. That's how powerful this addiction is.
Oh, I know.
And I went and I took about a day's worth of pills, and then I stopped. And
That's unusual.
I became a dad 92 days after my sobriety date. I got sober in October of 2007. My oldest son was born in January of 2008. And I have, thank God, a day at a time, been sober since.
When do you start going to meetings in earnest?
I started going to meetings in earnest after coming back to New York, taking a handful of pills, waking up the following morning, shoes on, clothes on, and I had a real, like, what the fuck moment. What are you doing? You're about to be a father. You just spent 2 weeks. You went to your first meeting. And from that moment on, I went to meetings every day.
Where'd you go? Was it a home meeting somewhere?
Yeah, I went to the Citicorp building in Midtown Manhattan. I went to a 7:30 a.m. meeting. They had meetings like kind of throughout the day. And that became my home group.
Citicorp has a bunch.
Yeah, I think they may be called Citigroup.
Yeah, interesting.
And I went to that 7:30 a.m. meeting every day, and a guy, maybe my first week there, gave me a marble. He said, I want you to have this marble. Keep it with you. Keep it in your pocket. So if you ever feel like you've lost your marbles, here's a marble. And I held on to that marble like it was some ancient relic that had been blessed by some high priest somewhere. Actually, I was going through Times Square once, and this was back in the day where people would collect money for the homeless in those big 5-gallon like water jugs, that you.
Yep.
And I dropped some change in, and I accidentally dropped my marble in there. And I stood there on the sidewalk in the middle of Times Square, and I dumped that 5-gallon thing out so I could get my marble. But I eventually got my marbles back.
Yep.
And Yeah, but it's a lot of work, and it continues to be a lot of work. But it's incredibly gratifying, and I thought, you know what, I need to sit down and write some of these stories, really just for me, at least initially, But when I was struggling, I read addiction memoirs because they gave me hope. I also remember very vividly watching the movie Ray. With Jamie Foxx, and he was a massive heroin addict, Ray Charles. And I remember seeing him get clean in that movie and thinking, holy shit, okay, this can be done. And so I just figured, I'm going to write my story, and I hope, that it might, even if it impacts one person,
Sure. That's as needed for pain.
Yeah, as needed for pain, which just seemed like the perfect title for what I was doing.
Was there any more slipping around after that first pill?
There was no more slipping around after
really?
that. And I'm incredibly blessed, and it's a miracle that I'm sitting here talking to you right now. And I know that every time I read about someone ODing and dying, obviously it's tragic, it's horrible, but it truly is, but for the grace of God, I'm incredibly, incredibly lucky to be here. But I was also very lucky to have, to be in New York City, to have treatment options available to me, to have AA meetings available around the clock. I did an IOP. I did an outpatient treatment in New York City.
Oh, good.
And I took it and continue to take it very seriously. I think as we look at this, what is a national health crisis right now, it can't be easier to get the drug than it is to get the treatment. In my view, right? And there are Rust Belt communities being wiped out. There are lives being ruined every day. I saw some statistic recently that said about 130 people die from an opiate-related overdose every day.
It's now, three. They're in Los Angeles. They're dying all the time. It's fentanyl and heroin though now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And primarily fentanyl. And because when the doctors cut everybody off, they didn't call them in and go, you have a disease called addiction. We didn't intend this to happen. Let's go get it treated. They just said, you're a bad patient. Get out of here.
Right. And so
then the heroin kicks in.
Right. And let's be clear, right? Again, this is your field.
Yep.
But it's my belief that anyone that takes opiates, it's not unlike nicotine, right? Anyone that takes opiates for a certain amount of time habitually, whatever that time period is, in my case, it was a very short period of time, becomes addicted.
Well, no, you have to have a genetic potential for it. You can become dependent.
Okay, fine.
But you're not going to become an addict because the dependents can look like addicts when they're using, but when they stop, they don't go back.
Right.
They're not interested anymore. And the addict goes back.
And how do they stop? Do they stop? Do they wean? Do they just stop?
Weaning doesn't work. They either have someone manages their withdrawal.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, in my case though, it was just really, really, really brutal.
That's brutal, yeah.
So, and this is a huge crisis.
Did the drug addict get the rock star get treated? Did you get him?
I can't say because that friendship ended. But there, so I honestly, I don't know. But the rock star started asking me for money because despite having, accumulated an extraordinary amount of wealth over the course of his life and career, he was being watched very closely by his ex-wives and by his accountant who had known that he had a ongoing drug problem. Right. And couldn't withdraw $1,500 cash to get the pills. Yeah. So we had this very bizarre conversation one night where he was like, "Hey man, like, can you get this?" And I was like, "Okay, but what's going on?" And it eventually, he explained, "Listen, I'm just, I just don't have access to cash like that, And so I sort of carried him, and happily, though, I guess, because it was someone else that was in it with me, right? Misery loves company. And while it didn't feel like misery at the time, it most certainly was.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have a problem on our streets now. That's where they've all